I want to start with making sure the families know that we're thinking about them. I know a lot of people have reached out to myself, Officer Rex, Sergeant Mathis, our teammates as well. There's been an outpour of support from the community, from other agencies throughout the nation and through the world, and I just want to tell them we greatly appreciate that. But I also hope that that along with all of us, that we remember the victims. And about that day in question, like Sergeant Mathis had stated, we had just started our shift and we were at the office. I was completing some administrative task, sending some emails when the radio was, I believe I had my radio sitting on my desk. One of our partners, Detective Wagner, he sits to the left of me. I believe his radio was there, and we heard the 1,000 code go out of the active shooter, and we heard the dispatch location and that it was in Midtown. Regardless if it was in Midtown or not, like every other officer in our department, we took off running out of the office, plugged in the address on our GPSs, and we took off towards the location. As we were on our way to the school itself, our dispatch was doing a phenomenal job. They were giving us as much updates as they could. They told us that the individual had entered into the school. They were actively shooting, gave us a description, and they were receiving this information from the individuals that were already on scene. When I arrived on scene, another officer had already arrived on scene. To this day, I still don't know who that officer is. There was hundreds of officers that responded. But I've learned that that officer had arrived on the other side of the school. I came off of Harding Pike and entered coming up the hill towards the school. When I started to approach, or when I pulled my car up, I observed a female on a cell phone, who later found out was one of the employees of the school. The female was pointing to the left, so I ended up pulling my vehicle towards the left. I ran into another individual, a male that was outside, rolled my window down, asked where they were. That individual, who I later learned was also an employee of the school, told me that they were around the side and asked where. And at that point, without hesitation, the employee just took off running towards the door that was later learned to be where the shooter had entered. He took off running and telling me to follow him, which helped out tremendously. So I stayed in my vehicle and drove that direction. He was kind of hugging around the vehicles that were parked on the side because, like they said, we didn't know where the shooter was. He just knew that the shooter had entered into this door right at the entrance. So he said when he got closer to the door, he pointed and told me that they had entered right there. So I ended up parking my vehicle, exiting, and noticed that all the glass to that door had been shot out. Saw shell casings on the ground, bullet holes on the door. So I immediately made entry. As I made entry into the school, I saw an individual that I believe has been identified as the janitor. He was laid out on the ground, not moving. I relayed that information to the over our radio to the dispatch that I had made entry and that I had an individual that was down. Still didn't have a stimulus. The shooter wasn't shooting at that point. So started just like Officer Rex, Sergeant Mathis, and every other officer that had gotten there, started clearing rooms as fast as possible, trying to find where the shooter was. I was on the first floor. I had cleared part of the first floor and along with the gymnasium when I had somehow made my way towards a door that led me back outside. That's where I made contact with one of our teammates, Detective Wagner, and two patrol officers. At that point, we were told that the shooter was possibly on the second floor. So at that point, that's when on the body cam you see where we ended up going up the stairwell and made our way to a locked door. At the time, I was upset that we had just hit a locked door, but now looking back, I'm thankful we hit a locked door because that was the school doing what they've been trained to do. The door was locked, so knowing we didn't have a way of getting in, and hearing on the radio that Officer Rex and Sergeant Mathis had a team and that they were making entry, the decision was made that we'd push back out and link back with or try to link up with those officers that were making entry on another side. We ended up cutting through the gymnasium that, like I said, I'd already previously had gone through. By that point, Detective Plesey had linked up with us along with Detective Cagle, who both are on the same team. When we came in the hallway, that's when you could see down the hallway Sergeant Mathis was standing watching a hallway, and later learned Officer Rex and some others had gone to the right and were clearing rooms. We ran down that hallway because knowing that they were already ahead of us, it was believed those rooms had been cleared. So we linked up with Sergeant Mathis. I told Sergeant Mathis we were with him, and then we continued systematically clearing the rooms that we came upon. At some point around that time frame is when we started hearing the first shots. Once we started hearing the first shots, that's when everything kind of kicked into overdrive for us. We had gone up the stairwell, made our way down the hallway. That's when I ran into that second victim, laid on the ground. We had to push past the victim because we continued to hear more shots being fired. Like Sergeant Mathis stated, it was very distinctive. You could clear as day tell that there were rifle rounds being fired. We came upon a T intersection. Sergeant Mathis was on one side and I was on the other side. We didn't know if the shooter was to the left or the right. Smoke was everywhere. The fire alarm was going off. It was somewhere right around that point we heard another shot, and so it told us that the shooter was to our right. That's when I made the call and yelled that the shooter was right, and we pushed right and continued down that hallway. Officer Rex had caught up to us. I noticed that Officer Rex had a rifle with a LPVO on it. Not knowing where the shooter was in the distance that we would possibly encounter with the shooter, asked Officer Rex to push forward for us, which he did without hesitation. We continued down that path until we encountered the shooter. Once the situation was ended with the shooter, like Sergeant Mathis and everybody stated, our job wasn't done. We knew that there was victims. We had to pass those victims. So I immediately switched gears, left that scene, and ran the route that we had just taken back outside. Other officers had responded, and they were making entry on different rooms. It had been broadcasted that the shooter had been taken down, and I think it clicked for every officer that was on scene. At that point, it was time to start trying to render aid to the victims and start evacuating the school. So we implemented our rescue task force protocol. I ended up coming out of a separate door that we had not made entry into, linked up with one of the ADTEL supervisors that was outside with Commander, and coordinated with the sergeant on where everything had taken place, and to have officers start responding in with us. I remained there for a while until more officers got on scene. When I felt like enough officers were on scene, Commander had stepped up and advised us to step back and go to our vehicles. That was pretty much, at that point I was done with the scene. I wanted to help. I know Officer Rex wanted to help. I know Sergeant Mathis wanted to help and continue to do what we could, but at that point, enough of our co-workers were there, and they were handling it for us. So we were able to step aside. That's when I was able to call my wife and tell her I was okay, advise her of everything, and that